Alright guys, thanks for checking in. So this video is going to take you through how to change your units. When you're doing this, you have two options. The first option is you have a base unit, and that's something like an ohm or an amp or a volt, and you want to change it into a prefix to make it easier to write. Alright, so prefix being something like milli or micro or mega. Alright, so those were some of the prefixes that we've looked at today. And the other option is, of course, then to go backwards. Maybe I have a prefix number with a prefix, and I want to figure out what it is in the base units. Alright, so let's take a look at this one first. Alright, so option number one, we have a base unit and we want to change it to a prefixed unit. Alright, so let's take an example. Let's take an example from ohms. Alright, let's use ohms that we've seen so far. Now, we've got two of the most common prefixes that you'll see when we're dealing with ohms in electronics is the kilo prefix. That's symbolized by a small k, and that means 1,000. Alright, or 10 to the third power. The other one you'll see that's slightly less common, but still common, is the mega prefix, and that's symbolized by a uppercase M, and that stands for 1 million. Alright, or 10 to the sixth power. So let's talk about an example here. So suppose I have a reading or a resistor that has 3,000 ohms, and I want to change it into kilo ohms. Alright, so let's do kilo ohms. Well, kilo means 1,000. If I want to change my base unit into a prefixed unit, then that means I'm going to divide. Alright, so I'm going to do 3,000 divided by 1,000. Alright, that's going to give me 3. But this 1,000 means I changed into kilo ohms. I'm not in ohms anymore. I've changed it to kilo ohms. Alright. So this is the same as saying 3 times 1,000 ohms. Alright, but that 1,000 has been replaced by a k, a prefix. Another way to do this, to divide by a multiple of 10, is to pretend that there's a decimal point here. So I'm going to add a decimal point at the end of my number. And I'm going to move this decimal point, the number of spaces to the left, equal to how many tens there are in the number. So if this is 10 to the power of 3, then I'm going to move this decimal point 1, 2, 3 spaces to the left. And that gives me 3.0. That's where my decimal point moved. And since I moved it 3 spaces, that's what I do to get the kilo prefix. So I'm in kilo ohms. Alright, let's look at one more example. Let's get rid of this. Alright, let's take a look now at mega. Alright, so maybe now I have 5,200,000 ohms of resistance. Maybe this is a resistor or a circuit, whatever. If I want to do mega, then I need to do the same thing I did before, where I divide. If I'm going from base to prefix, I'm going to divide by the mega prefix. So this is 1,000,000. Alright. Sorry about that. If I want to divide by 1,000,000, maybe you could do that in your head. Maybe you can see it. Or you can do the second trick I showed you before, which is mega has 6 zeros in it. Million has 6 zeros in it. So I'm going to pretend there's a little decimal point here at the end. And I'm going to move it 6 places to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that means I've moved it to where it becomes 5.2. But I've moved it 1,000,000. So instead of ohms, it's now mega ohms. So we've got 5.2 mega ohms. All right. Let's take maybe one more example. Let's do now, ohms is one way to look at it. It's 1 unit. Another common unit is amps. Now, amps, we're rarely going to get anything bigger than an amp. 2 amps will kill you, and that's about what comes out of a wall socket. So we're not dealing with anything nearly that big. Most of the time, we're dealing with milliamps, and that's a small m. That's equivalent to 1/1,000. All right. It's the same as saying 10 to the negative third. And there's then micro amps. All right, and that's symbolized by this weird little letter mu. It's a Greek letter. If you don't want to write that, you can write U. That's fine. And this is like the opposite of mega. This is 1 divided by 1,000,000, or 10 to the negative sixth. All right, so these are our common. These are the most common prefixes we'll see when we study amps. So amps, again, we're going from a base to a prefix. So we are going to divide, all right, when we're going into these numbers. Now let's suppose we have 0.025 amps. Okay. If I want to change it into milliamps, and this number is something we would prefer to have in milliamps, I'm going to divide it by, this is strange, but bear with me. I'm going to divide it by, instead of 1,000 like I did before for kilo, I'm going to divide it by 1/1,000. Now, for those of you who remember your math, this is the same as saying 0.025 amps times 1,000. So I'm still dividing, but I'm dividing by a fraction. All right, so this means what I can do is I'm going to move the decimal point. In this case, when you multiply something, I'm going to move the decimal point to the right, the same number of spaces as zeros. In this case, 1,000 has 3 zeros. So I'm going to take my decimal point, I'm going to move it 1, 2, 3 spaces to the right. And that gives me 25. And not amps, but I did by 1,000. So my prefix is milliamps. So this is 25 milliamps. Let's take a look at another example. Suppose I have 0.000035 amps. And again, I want to change it. Now, because of how small it is, I'm going to go even smaller with my prefix. I'm going to use the micro prefix. Well, again, this would have to be divided by 1/1,000,000. But again, dividing by a fraction is the same as multiplying by its reciprocal, if you remember your math. All right, so this is 0.000035 amps times 1,000,000. Well, again, multiplying means I'm going to take this 0 and I'm going to move it this time 6 places to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 places to the right. And that puts me at 35 not amps anymore, but microamps. So milliamps, microamps. Those are two good examples. All right. Now let's briefly, now that's the tough part, is figuring out how to go from base to prefix. Prefix to base is just the opposite. All right, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here. But let's go prefix to base unit. All right, well, let's go back to ohms again. So suppose I have 25 kilo ohms. All right, well, you can see this as a multiplication problem. This is the same as saying 25 times a kilo ohm. Well, 25 times a kilo is times 1,000 ohms. So in this case, you would end up with 25,000 ohms. Just like that. Another way to do this, multiplying by 1,000, would be to say 25 has a decimal point right here. Kilo has 3 zeros. So I'm going to move my decimal point, since I'm multiplying, I'm going to move my decimal point 1, 2, 3 spaces to the right. So this would be, I'd fill in the zeros. 1, 2, 3 zeros. So this is 25,000. And if I have my decimal point there, 0.0 ohms. Same thing with mega. Maybe I have 3.2 mega ohms. Well, that's the same as saying 3.2 times a mega ohm, which means I'm doing 3.2 times 1 million. All right? And if you work that out, you end up getting 3,200,000 ohms. Just like that. Or again, you have 3.2, which already has a decimal place, and mega has 10 to the 6th, 6 zeros. So I'm going to move my decimal point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 places and fill in the zeros. 1, 2, 3, 5 zeros. So this comes out to 3,200,000 ohms. Great. So the trick here is just treating it as a multiplication problem. Well, let's take a look at the amps we did before. All right. Same as before. Let's say we have 15 milliamps. Again, treat it like a multiplication problem. 15 times a milliamp. We've got 15. Milli stands for 1 divided by 1,000. Well, now, when you multiply by a fraction, it could be the same as dividing. So 15 divided by 1,000. Well, 15 divided by 1,000, if you did that on your calculator or some such like that, you would end up having 0.015 amps. And again, you can use the trick we used before. 15, put a decimal point here. Milli is equal to 10 to the negative third, so we've got 3 zeros. And because I'm dividing, I'm going to move to the left. 1, 2, 3 spaces. Fill in the zeros, and that gives me 0.015 amps. One more. Let's take a look at how about 3.7 microamps. 3.7 microamps is 3.7 times a microamp. Well, that's the same as 3.7 times 1 divided by 1 million. All right, and that's the same as dividing by a million. All right. Well, to do this would be, again, to use the trick. Here's 3.7. And there's my decimal point. Now the micro prefix is equal to 10 to the negative 6th. So we've got 6 places to move. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And fill in the zeros. So I end up with 0.000037 amps. Really small number. All right. Okay. So let me give you a few problems that you can try, and then you can pause the video, try them out, and then when you unpause the video, I will give you the answers. So first, let's go from base unit to prefix over here, and we'll do the opposite over here, prefix to base. All right, so let's do 4 for each. Now we'll do 3 for each. All right, so for the first one, I want you to change 3,000. No, I already did that. Let's do 3,200 ohms into kilo ohms. All right, and then for the second one, let's do 52 million ohms into mega ohms. And we'll do 0.0000023 amps. I want you to change that into microamps. All right. And now let's go backwards. So let's do, for this one, let's do 2.7 microamps. Change that to amps. Let's do 130 milliamps. I want you to change that to amps. And for the last one, let's do 8.7 kilo ohms, and I want you to change that to ohms. All right, so I'll give you a second, and when I come back, when you unpause the video, I'll have the answers posted. All right, and here are your answers. Please feel free to comment on our class page with any questions or ask me in class. Thanks for stopping in.